It's been a few months since I've done a video about my favorite part of Artemis, the Lunar Gateway. Now, although this space station without a mission, as it's been called by its detractors, has many things, many strikes against it, at least in the opinions of some very famous people in the space industry, like Dr. Zubrin and even Buzz Aldrin, I've always argued that this station has many practical uses, and it's gone through a number of changes. For example, the assembly process that you're seeing right now is not the current plan at all. The SLS is going to be virtually uninvolved with the assembly of this station. Instead, commercial rockets, most probably the Falcon Heavy, will be responsible for delivering at least the initial modules for this station, and in addition to that, SpaceX will be responsible for resupplying the astronauts on the station, extending their stay on the Lunar Gateway and their ability to explore the lunar surface for longer periods of time. But there have been other developments with the Lunar Gateway, most significant of which was an announcement made just this week, at the same time that NASA was announcing the presence of very small amounts of water on sunlit areas of the moon. Another announcement was made with almost no fanfare about a formalized agreement between the European Space Agency and NASA, and in my opinion, this announcement is far more practical to the success of Artemis and man's future on the moon. And I'm not saying all of this just because I happen to like this station. No, this agreement secures not only the future of the Artemis program and NASA's future in exploring the moon, but also the future of SpaceX and the lunar starship. How is this the case? Well, I'm about to explain all of that in just a few minutes. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Angry Astronaut. So, a few days ago, we had a very exciting announcement, or so we were led to believe, by NASA, something that was highly publicized and something that I rolled out an episode on. And sadly, I have not made any episodes after that. And that's largely because we had a tropical storm roar through here. It caused a lot of damage, a lot of power outages, inconvenience to my children, family members, that sort of thing. So it caused some delays in my work. But all of that is behind me, hopefully. So happy Halloween to those of you who observe that sort of thing. And hopefully I get this released on Halloween. If I don't, then happy belated Halloween. But one more episode about something that scares me. And of course, this has nothing to do with ghosts, goblins, that sort of thing, but rather what might happen to Artemis. In a couple of days, we're going to have an election, and there may very well be a change in administration. And with a change in administration, there could very well come changes at NASA. And what scares me more than just about anything right now is the new administration, Congress, whatever, coming to the conclusion that there are better things for the American government to be spending their money on than going back to the moon. After all, we've been there before, right? That sort of idiotic thinking. So what if that were to happen? Well, a very scary thought indeed, not just in terms of bringing our exploration of the solar system to a halt again until we come up with a new plan, assuming we ever do that, but also possibly surrendering the moon to other countries who may or may not have other objectives in mind when it comes to the strategic use of the moon. All of that having been said, however, there was another announcement that NASA made with no fanfare whatsoever about the Lunar Gateway. And this was a very well put together arrangement made between NASA and the ESA about the Lunar Gateway that is going to practically secure the future of Artemis. How? Well, I'm going to explain right now. To understand the importance of this agreement, we must first understand the importance of the Lunar Gateway in the first place. And the first stage in constructing this space station is not going to be carried out by SpaceX or any of the other big rocket companies, but by little old Rocket Lab. That's right, next year, the Photon spacecraft deployed by the Electron rocket is going to send a small sat into a lunar orbit that we have never attempted to use before to determine its viability, because that's the orbit that the Lunar Gateway is going to be using as well. The mission is called Capstone, and the orbit that this satellite is going to attempt to enter is something called a rectilinear halo orbit. Now, this orbit has a number of advantages. Firstly, it never falls into the moon's shadow, allowing for constant communication with mission control back on Earth. Secondly, although it doesn't orbit the moon itself, but rather one of its Lagrange points, it provides excellent access to the moon's poles, which is where we are most likely to be setting up lunar bases. Now, the Lunar Gateway has its own propulsion system, more on that later, but it allows the Gateway not only to orbit the poles, but also change its orbit slightly, giving access to the entire moon as opposed to the Apollo missions, which pretty much had to be equatorial, because they launched from an equatorial orbit on Earth from Cape Canaveral, and then rendezvoused with the moon in an equatorial location as well. This is going to be entirely different. Now, step one of the current plan involves the Orion rendezvousing with the Lunar Gateway, and then, after that, dispatching a lander from the Gateway when it's at its closest approach to the moon over the North Pole. The lander then enters into a low lunar orbit and sets down at the lunar south pole. Although this may seem counterintuitive, this is actually the best way to approach the South Pole. And then, once it's stayed there for a week or so, it leaves, re-entering a low lunar orbit and rendezvous with the Gateway. Now, assuming you use a reusable lander like the Dynetics Alpaca or perhaps the Lunar Starship, you can visit the moon time and again from the Lunar Gateway. All you need, essentially, is fuel, and in the case of this particular lander, some additional drop tanks, which can be easily delivered by commercial rockets and don't require additional SLS visits, whereas a moon direct approach would require a new SLS every time astronauts wanted to go back to the moon. This, of course, is the most efficient way to explore the lunar surface and also to determine the best location for a lunar base, but it is by no means the only advantage that this base has to offer. First of all, this station is far more than just a small ISS orbiting the moon. Although it certainly is international, look at all those ESA components. But one of the most important differences is the power and propulsion element. This solar electric ion drive uses ionized fuel to propel the station into different orbits. Only minor adjustments need to be made to change the station's orbit, and so the fuel that it's going to carry will be actually enough to last the station for 15 years. Granted, it won't be able to go anyplace fast, but it won't have to. It just needs to change its orbital configuration from time to time. The PPE, as it is called, will be 3 times as powerful as any previous Hall effect thruster, essentially a word for a powerful solar electric or ion thruster, and will also allow us to test a new type of propulsion for potential missions to Mars in the future. The solar energy provided by the PPE will also allow a communications relay on the station to communicate from the far side of the moon to mission control, something astronauts have not been able to do until now. The Falcon Heavy that deploys the PPE will also deploy the HALO, or Habitation and Logistics Outpost. The HALO is a tiny habitation area about the size of a small studio apartment. However, it also provides additional life support for the station beyond the measly 30 days provided by the Orion, allowing the astronauts to stay on the station longer. Also included in this module is a sample return feature that will allow us to test any samples brought back not only from the moon, but from Mars and other destinations to ensure that we do not unleash any sort of hostile bacteria on our home planet. And if you think I'm being paranoid about this, I interviewed an expert on the matter not that long ago.
In 1965, NASA gave me a contract to study how to return samples from Mars. And my conclusion was, do not return them to Earth, return them to an orbiting laboratory or to a laboratory erected on the moon and study them there rather than take the risk of bringing them back, because there's certainly likely to be damage that would release the sample to Earth, and that happened with subsequent samples, including the return of the lunar astronauts who, spread stuff all over the place.
Would you say then that the Lunar Gateway, the proposed Lunar Gateway, would be a good solution for this?
Yeah, I think don't bring them back here. Take some experts to a lab up there and study them.
So on to the ESA contributions, because unlike the rest of Artemis, or most of it anyway, this is truly an international endeavor. The first is the Esprit, and I may be mispronouncing that module, which provides not only fuel for the PPE, but also communications down to the moon to be relayed later on. And in addition to this is the just as important International Habitation module, which is used for badly needed living space for the astronauts, along with additional laboratory space as well. On top of that, it provides even more life support for the station, allowing for even further extended missions beyond 90 days at this point. It is also important to remember that the ESA is building the service module for the Orion, and they committed to building 2 more of them in the recent agreement signed this week, indicating the ESA's long-term commitment to Artemis. And just as interesting is the fact that NASA is starting to include the Dragon XL in its overall station design. That's the SpaceX resupply ship, indicating that, as we have suspected for some time, that the Dragon XL is actually going to provide additional living space for the astronauts and perhaps be repurposed as additional modules. NASA has also announced their intention of using the Gateway as a centralized fuel depot, and this is where the Lunar Starship could come in, either attached to the Gateway or flying in tandem with it. The Starship could provide badly needed methane fuel to vessels that run off of methalox propellant, such as the Alpaca. This could work in reverse, of course, as I have suggested a number of times before, with a centralized fuel depot in lunar orbit providing fuel to low Earth orbit for a lot less delta V to refuel the Starship, or in the case of liquid hydrogen, to provide the propellant for nuclear thermal rockets on their way to Mars. And perhaps the most important function of the Lunar Gateway, as I have said before, is to serve as a dress rehearsal for a mission to Mars. A station in lunar orbit will be exposed to very similar conditions as an interplanetary mission will, in terms of radiation, cosmic rays, long-term isolation, pretty much everything, so we can test radiation shielding and other methods necessary for a successful journey to the Red Planet. This station will prove invaluable for that purpose. So why does this recent agreement, why is it so important? Well, even if we have a change in administration, this guy ends up becoming president. Both he and Barack Obama before him have a reputation of not angering our European allies. And now that we have a signed agreement, a signed commitment for the Lunar Gateway, this man is highly unlikely to break it, no matter what he might think about Artemis. And the Lunar Gateway serves very little purpose if it doesn't have Artemis to go with it. And this, in my opinion, is why Jim Bridenstine has set up all of these high-profile agreements, the Artemis Accords, the recent agreement with the ESA, also these multi-billion-dollar contracts with high-profile companies that provide thousands of American jobs. Cancel all of these things and you sacrifice American jobs and American goodwill overseas. What politician is going to do that? And in so doing, Jim Bridenstine, in my opinion, has ensured that even if he loses his job after this election, his legacy through Artemis will live on. You know, when I first started this channel, I was not a big fan of Jim Bridenstine. I gave him a very hard time about what I thought was an unequal treatment of the Crew Dragon compared to the Starliner. I really thought that the guy was biased in favor of Boeing and against SpaceX. But since that time, Jim Bridenstine has proven himself to be an effective administrator, and he has a lot of insight and a lot of really good ideas. And I think in many ways he knows that his days may be numbered. And that's one of the reasons why he put this agreement in place, among many other things, to make certain that Artemis proceeds the way that he wants it and not the way that the House of Representatives put forward, handing everything over to these guys. And by the way, I still need to get to 40,000 subscriptions. I just hit 28,000. Super excited about that. 12,000 to go before you guys get to watch this thing get blasted to bits. Get ready. Probably still going to take a couple of months, but I am super excited. It'd be wonderful if it happened by the end of the year. But back to Jim Bridenstine. The guy really has put a lot of things into motion to secure the future of Artemis, even if he does lose his job. I cannot see a Joe Biden administration causing that much trouble with our European allies. It just doesn't fit his MO, as I explained in the video. And there are many other things Jim Bridenstine has done as well, some of which I've explained in the video, to really ensure that the whole Moon to Mars model that NASA's been working on for all of these years stays intact, and that we go to the moon to stay and then proceed to Mars after that. And SpaceX, also as I explained in the video, is bought into this as well. It's all very, very exciting, and it really wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for this highly capable administrator. So cheers to you, Jim Bridenstine, and very sorry for anything negative I may have said about you in the past, as if you're listening. But all of that having been said, it's time for a new segment called The Angry Decrees. And it has to do with these guys. Have a look. Here's this week's Angry Decree. If you are designing a spacecraft designed to carry living human beings, and on the first test flight you have more than 50 screw-ups, you are in violation of Angry Decree number 1. In which case you sacrifice your bid for the NASA contract that you so want and got so much money for, and it is opened up to other competitors. Sorry, but in my view, 50 screw-ups is the limit, and over 100, well, that's just ridiculous. And oh yeah, if it takes you more than a year to correct these screw-ups, and once they're finally corrected, you're still going to be charging us more than the Russians, that counts as an exceptionally flagrant violation. So I hope you enjoyed that. Expect more angry decrees as time goes forward. It really is in keeping with why I started this channel. Not to just report on space events and space news from a neutral standpoint, but rather to give my own editorialized opinion on new developments, what they mean, what's good for the future of mankind in space, and what is very, very bad. And of course, as you all know, Boeing definitely fits into that category. And by the way, if you would like to submit some ideas for angry decrees in the future, please send me an email. I have it linked in the description, and I'll be happy to review it. Or if you are a supporter of mine on Patreon and Discord, just DM me through Discord and I'll look at it there. Either way, I would be more than interested to have a look at you guys' opinions as to what should be included in future angry decrees. So, you know how to support this channel, this unusual channel, and the unusual content that I continue to churn out. It's all in the description. Many, many ways to support me. And thank you so much for the support you've already given me. It has made this whole thing my career. It's also allowed me to travel to Cape Canaveral and Huntsville to report on the state of affairs there. And I intend to go other places, including Boca Chica, as things develop there in Texas. So until we are ready to push forward with the Lunar Gateway and man's permanent presence on the moon, with nobody standing in our way, nobody saying that, oh, we've been to the moon once before, why do we need to go back? Enough of that nonsense. We're going to the moon, we're going to stay, and then we're going to Mars, or maybe both at the same time. And until those things happen, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.